Ricky Nelson's voice was smooth, his smile was perfect, and for a time he seemed untouchable. From the living rooms of America on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, to the top of the charts with Travelin' Man and Hello Mary Lou, he was the boy next door who became a rock and roll pioneer. But behind the clean-cut image, his life was far more complicated. His marriage collapsed, his career faced reinvention, and then came the night that would change everything. On December 31st, 1985, Ricky Nelson boarded a plane with his fiancée and his band. By the end of the night, they were gone. For decades, no one knew exactly why. Rumors of drugs, sabotage, and scandal clouded his legacy. Yet the real story, uncovered only after years of investigation, is more devastating than any tabloid headline. The truth reveals not just how Ricky Nelson died, but how preventable it was. And once you hear it, you'll never see his life or his death the same way again. Ricky Nelson was born Eric Hilliard Nelson on May 8, 1940, in Teaneck, New Jersey. From the very beginning, his life was inseparable from show business. His parents, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, were already familiar names in American entertainment. Ozzie, a bandleader turned actor, and Harriet, a singer and actress, had cultivated a wholesome image that resonated with audiences across the country. When Ricky was just a boy, he and his older brother David were swept into that same orbit of fame. In 1944, Ozzie and Harriet launched The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet on the radio. The program, built around the everyday life of the Nelson family, became one of the most successful family shows of its era. By the early 1950s, it made the leap to television, and the Nelsons became America's neighbors. Viewers tuned in weekly to watch Ozzie, Harriet, David, and Ricky navigate fictionalized but familiar household dilemmas. Millions of Americans quite literally watched Ricky grow up before their eyes. It was in this unique spotlight that Ricky's charisma began to shine. With his striking good looks, natural ease on screen, and soft-spoken charm, he stood out immediately. Audiences, especially teenage girls, connected with him in ways the show's producers could hardly have predicted. Yet unlike many children of television, Ricky refused to be limited by the role of the good son in a family sitcom. He wanted something more, something of his own. That opportunity came in 1957. Still a teenager, Ricky recorded a cover of Fats Domino's I'm Walkin'. It wasn't intended to be a career-defining move, but when the single was released, it rocketed up the charts. Practically overnight, Ricky Nelson was no longer just Ozzie and Harriet's youngest son. He was a rock and roll singer, with his own following. The success of I'm Walkin' opened the floodgate. What followed was a string of hits that established Ricky as one of the first true teen idols of the rock era. Songs like Poor Little Fool, Lonesome Town, Travelin' Man, and Hello Mary Lou captured the angst, hope, and sweetness of young love. His smooth, melodic voice stood apart from the raw energy of Elvis Presley or the swagger of Chuck Berry. Yet it carried a quiet power that made rock music palatable to more conservative households. Parents trusted Ricky Nelson, and teenagers adored him. By the end of the 1950s, Ricky was a phenomenon. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he had the advantage of national television exposure every single week. On The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, he often performed his songs, bringing rock and roll into America's living rooms at a time when the genre was still considered rebellious. Those appearances foreshadowed what the Beatles and later stars would achieve through television performances. But Ricky had done it first. By the age of 21, Ricky Nelson had sold millions of records and cemented his place as one of the best-selling male solo artists in the United States. But with fame came expectations. He was adored as the clean-cut boy next door, yet behind the curtain, he was navigating the difficult reality of being a young man under constant scrutiny. The world saw a smiling teen idol, but Ricky himself knew he had much more to say, and the battle to be taken seriously as an artist was only just beginning. By the early 1960s, The American music landscape was shifting. The Beatles were on the horizon, Motown was rising, and the once dominant style of clean-cut teen idols was beginning to fade. Ricky Nelson, who had spent the better part of his adolescence being adored for songs like Lonesome Town and Poor Little Fool, found himself facing a crossroads. He could either cling to the sound that had made him famous, or evolve into something new, something riskier, but truer to his own instincts. For Ricky, the choice wasn't easy. He was still a major star, but the charts were no longer bending to his will. Audiences that once screamed at his television appearances now had 1,000 new distractions. Elvis was reinventing himself. Bob Dylan was rewriting what it meant to be a singer-songwriter, and the Beatles were about to dominate the world stage. If Ricky wanted to stay relevant, he had to change. That change came in the form of country rock. Long before the genre had a name, Ricky was drawn to its blend of sincerity and grit. In the mid-60s, he began experimenting with a more mature sound that leaned heavily on country influences while maintaining a rock backbone. To many of his longtime fans, it was a confusing shift. They wanted the boyish crooner they remembered. But to Ricky, this new direction was about integrity, about proving he wasn't just a television idol but an artist with depth. The Stone Canyon Band was born out of this transformation. With their collaboration, Ricky began to carve out a role as a pioneer of the country rock genre. While commercial success was modest compared to his earlier days, the music was richer, layered with acoustic textures and lyrics that spoke to personal truth rather than teenage romance. Artists like the Eagles would later carry the torch and dominate the charts with the very style Ricky helped introduce. Yet for Ricky, the road was uphill. This struggle came to a head in 1971, when he agreed to perform at a major concert in Madison Square Garden. The event, billed as a nostalgic celebration, drew fans eager to relive the hits of their youth. Ricky, however, wanted to show them who he had become. He performed his new material, songs that reflected his growth as an artist. The reaction was crushing. Instead of cheers, he was met with jeers. Fans booed, frustrated that he wasn't delivering the soundtrack of their teenage memories. For Ricky, the experience was both humiliating and clarifying. He realized in that moment that he could never win if he kept trying to please everyone. That painful night inspired what would become one of his most iconic songs, Garden Party. Released in 1972, the track told the story of that Madison Square Garden concert with a blunt honesty that only Ricky could deliver. Its chorus carried a lesson born from rejection. You can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. Garden Party wasn't just a hit, it was a comeback. The song reached the top 10 on the Billboard charts and gave Ricky a new identity. He was no longer just a former teen idol trying to hold on to glory. He was an artist standing on principle, willing to sacrifice commercial approval for authenticity. Fans who truly listened heard a man who had grown up, who had been scarred by rejection but refused to let it define him. In many ways, Garden Party summed up Ricky Nelson's entire career. It was the declaration of someone who had lived through the highs of stardom, the sting of dismissal, and the hard reality of reinvention. More than anything, it revealed the private truth Ricky had carried for years, that the boy next door had become a man, and he was finally singing not just for the crowd but for himself. While Ricky Nelson will forever be remembered for his music, his acting career formed another vital strand of his legacy. In many ways, it was inevitable. He had grown up on television, every expression and line of dialogue shaping America's impression of who he was. Yet Ricky refused to remain confined to a single role. From the time he was a boy, he was determined to explore acting beyond the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. His earliest screen appearance came in 1952, with Here Come the Nelsons, a light-hearted film designed to capitalize on the family's television success. Though still young, Ricky displayed a natural ease on screen that made audiences pay attention. A year later, He appeared in The Story of Three Loves, directed by the legendary Vincente Minnelli. Playing the younger version of a character portrayed by Farley Granger, Ricky again revealed that his talent extended well beyond being a novelty casting choice. But the defining moment in his acting career came in 1959. That year, director Howard Hawks cast him in the Western classic Rio Bravo. Starring alongside John Wayne and Dean Martin, Ricky played Colorado Ryan, a sharpshooter whose youthful energy brought a refreshing dynamic to the film. Hawks himself later credited Ricky's presence with broadening the movie's appeal and helping it achieve impressive box office results. For a 20-year-old who had grown up under the shadow of his famous parents, Rio Bravo was a chance to prove himself on equal footing with Hollywood legends. Following Rio Bravo, Ricky sought roles that allowed him to experiment with comedy and drama. In 1960, he starred opposite Jack Lemmon in The Wackiest Ship in the Army. The film's popularity even inspired a short-lived television series, though Ricky chose not to reprise his role. Still, the movie demonstrated his versatility. He wasn't afraid to dive into comedic timing while balancing moments of sincerity. Ricky also pursued projects that kept his family close. In 1965, he took the lead in Love and Kisses, a romantic comedy written and directed by his father, Ozzie Nelson. The film gave Ricky a platform to blend acting with his musical talents, and while it was not a blockbuster, it revealed the Nelson family's deep commitment to building projects together. By the late 1960s and into the 70s, Ricky transitioned into guest roles on television. He appeared in General Electric Theater in an episode titled The Wish Book, showing audiences that he could carry dramatic material beyond his established musical persona. He portrayed the outlaw Jesse James in Hondo, brought charm to the Over the Hill Gang in 1969 alongside veterans Walter Brennan and Pat O'Brien, and appeared in popular series such as The Streets of San Francisco, Petrocelli, and Owen Marshall, Counselor at Law. One of his more memorable television appearances came on The Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries, where he not only acted but also performed several of his songs. It was a reminder that his two careers, acting and music, were never entirely separate. Wherever he went, audiences expected both. Even into the 1980s, Ricky continued to balance music with television roles. He appeared in made-for-TV movies like 3 on a Date and the teen comedy High School USA in 1983. His guest appearance on The Love Boat offered one last glimpse of the charisma that had carried him since boyhood. Taken together, Ricky Nelson's acting career was not as dominant as his music, but it was no less important. It revealed his range, his willingness to try new things, and his determination not to be boxed in. Whether standing beside John Wayne in a classic Western, or playing himself with a guitar on a television set, Ricky proved that he was more than a teen idol. He was a performer in the fullest sense, a man who could sing, act, and connect with audiences across generations. Even at the height of his teen idol fame, Ricky Nelson's personal life was rarely his own. He was young, handsome, and adored by millions of girls who wrote him letters, screamed at his concerts, and watched him grow up every week on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Yet behind the curtain, one figure held enormous influence over Ricky's choices: his mother, Harriet Nelson. Harriet had spent years in the industry and knew how fame could swallow people whole. She believed in maintaining a polished public image at all costs, and when it came to her son's dating life, she was often wary. Many of the young women Ricky brought home didn't meet her standards of propriety or stability. Some she dismissed as fleeting distractions, others as potential dangers to his career. Ricky respected his mother, but the tension between his own desires and her protective instincts was a constant thread through his youth. That tension eased in 1963, when Ricky fell in love with Chris Harmon. To Harriet, Chris was different. She came from a family as well connected as the Nelsons. Her father, Tom Harmon, was a celebrated Heisman Trophy winner, and her mother, Elise Knox, had been a film actress in the 1940s. The Harmons and the Nelsons already shared social ties, and the union seemed not only natural but ideal. For fans, the wedding in April of that year was the stuff of Hollywood fairy tales. Two children of American royalty pledging their lives to each other. The marriage produced 4 children, each of whom carried the Nelson legacy into a new generation. Their firstborn, Tracy Nelson, inherited her father's gift for performance and carved a successful career in acting, most notably in the television series Father Dowling Mysteries. In 1967, Chris gave birth to twin boys, Gunnar and Matthew, who would later form the band Nelson. In 1990, their debut single Can't Live Without Your Love and Affection reached #1 on the Billboard charts, making the Nelsons the first family in music history to produce 3 generations of hitmakers. Their youngest child, Sam, was born in 1970, named for Ricky's father, Ozzie, whose middle name was Hilliard. Sam stayed closer to the arts, but largely avoided the public spotlight compared to his siblings. From the outside, the Nelson family appeared flawless. Ricky was the charming star, Chris the glamorous wife, and their children the continuation of 2 great American legacies. But behind closed doors, the picture was far more complicated. Ricky's career demanded relentless touring, late nights, and the constant pressure of trying to reinvent himself in a music industry that was unforgiving to aging teen idols. Chris, meanwhile, carried the weight of raising 4 children under the glare of fame while trying to maintain her own identity. Over time, cracks began to show. Reports of infidelity, emotional distance, and disagreements over money created tension that only grew heavier as the years passed. Ricky's need to perform clashed with Chris's need for stability. She reportedly struggled with the isolation and pressures of family life, while he often felt trapped between his career and domestic responsibilities. What once looked like a perfect match had slowly become a union defined by conflict. By the late 1970s, their marriage was unraveling. Separation followed, and eventually the legal battles began. Divorce proceedings dragged on, with bitter disputes over custody, finances, and public perception. In December of 1982, after nearly 20 years together, the marriage officially ended. For Ricky, the divorce left lasting scars. He adored his children and fought to keep them shielded from the ugliness of public scrutiny. But the breakup weighed heavily on him. It seeped into his later music, where themes of loss, regret, and longing became more pronounced. For a man who had once embodied the image of the American dream, handsome, talented, successful, and happily married, the collapse of his family life was a sobering reminder that even stars could not escape heartbreak. It was another layer of complexity in a life already lived under extraordinary pressure, and while Ricky carried himself with grace in public, those closest to him knew that the wounds from his marriage would never fully heal. The story of Ricky Nelson's life might have ended with his music and family struggles, but it was his death that became one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries. On December 31, 1985, Ricky boarded a World War II-era DC-3 aircraft with his fiancée Helen Blair and 5 members of his band. They were headed to Dallas, Texas, where Ricky was scheduled to perform at a New Year's Eve concert. For Ricky, it was another chance to reclaim the stage, another night to connect with an audience that had never truly left him. But before the night was over, tragedy struck. The plane caught fire mid-air and crashed near DeKalb, Texas. The pilots managed to survive by escaping through cockpit windows, but everyone in the cabin, Ricky, Helen, and his band, was gone. He was only 45 years old. In the days that followed, chaos and speculation filled the headlines. Early reports suggested a mechanical failure. Others hinted at sabotage, and almost immediately, tabloids began to spread darker accusations. Rumors that Ricky had been freebasing cocaine and that drug paraphernalia had been found at the scene. These whispers tarnished his legacy, painting a picture of self-destruction that seemed to fit the rock and roll stereotype. But Ricky's family and loyal fans insisted the story didn't add up. Toxicology tests later confirmed what his loved ones had said all along. There were no drugs, no alcohol in his system. The accusations were baseless, yet the official explanation remained frustratingly vague. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded that the fire had likely originated in the cabin heater, but they could not pinpoint the exact ignition source. This ambiguity left a haunting question mark hanging over his death for decades. Over the years, the mystery of Ricky Nelson's final moments became almost as famous as his music. Was it drugs, sabotage, or mechanical failure? The lack of clarity gave rise to endless speculation. His fans wanted closure. His family wanted truth. But the answers seemed out of reach. That began to change when aviation historians, forensic analysts, and journalists returned to the case years later, determined to uncover what had really happened. They combed through overlooked technical records, interviewed the surviving pilots, and examined the history of the aircraft itself. What they found was not only shocking, it was devastating. The DC-3 Ricky had been flying in was not just old, it was dangerously neglected. The cabin heater, located beneath the floorboards, had a long history of malfunctions. Mechanics had noted the problems repeatedly, and there were even complaints from previous flights. But instead of replacing it or grounding the plane, operators had chosen makeshift repairs that didn't comply with aviation safety standards. The heater had been jury-rigged into a ticking time bomb. On that final flight, the inevitable happened. The heater malfunctioned, sparking a fire that spread rapidly through the cabin. Toxic smoke filled the air, and without fire retardant insulation or an onboard extinguisher, the passengers had no chance. Investigators concluded that Ricky, Helen, and the band likely succumbed to smoke inhalation before the plane even went down. The pilots escaped, but for everyone else it was already too late. The most chilling truth was that Ricky Nelson's death was preventable. This wasn't fate, and it wasn't personal failure. It was human negligence. People knew the heater was unsafe. People knew the plane was not properly maintained. And still, it was allowed to fly. When the truth finally came to light, it didn't bring comfort. It brought outrage. Ricky Nelson, teen idol, music pioneer, father of 4, was lost not because of scandal or excess, but because safety had been ignored. His story, already filled with triumph and heartbreak, now ended as a grim cautionary tale. Ricky Nelson's life was a story of contrasts. He was the boy America watched grow up in their living rooms, the teen idol who softened rock and roll for an older generation, and the artist who refused to compromise when the world wanted him frozen in time. He reinvented himself when others faded, and he sang with honesty even when it cost him. Yet for all his resilience, his final chapter was stolen not by scandal or personal failing, but by negligence. A faulty heater, ignored warnings, and careless oversight ended the life of a man whose music had defined an era. For his family, the loss was immeasurable. For his fans, it was heartbreaking. And for history, it was a reminder that fame offers no shield from tragedy. Ricky Nelson's legacy endures through his songs, through his children, and through the memories of a generation that grew up with him. But the way his life ended will always haunt those who loved him. Because some mysteries, once solved, do not bring peace, they only deepen the sorrow. For more emotional stories, check out this video.